everyone, Clio here, and today I'm going to be talking about classics that I want to get around to in 2021. Now this list is going to be short, and it's also not going to be the case that I really plan to get around to all of these. Basically, I'm just rewarding myself higher for these if I do get around to them in 2021. So if you didn't see my video yesterday in which I talk about the 12 books for 2021, I will link that up there, as well as my reading goals video for 2021, because in 2021 I'm actually going to be using a sort of credit system. So I want to reduce the amount of unread books on my shelves, I want to curb my buying pattern, and so what I'm going to do is every book on those shelves, or any book that I acquire in 2021 that I read, is going to be worth 1 credit, and 1 credit equals 3 euros. So basically I need to read like 6-7 in order to be able to purchase a new release, for example. But certain books are going to be worth more than that 1 credit. So all of the books on yesterday's video, on the 12 books for 2021 video, will be worth 3 credits. Every book on the classics video that I'm doing now will be worth 2 credits. The reason for this video is that I don't have any set classics goal, but I do know that throughout the years I will at certain points in time want to read classics. It's usually the case that in 1 year I read a couple of classics. I don't really have any sort of classics goals, and classics isn't my main genre, but I do like putting in a classic every once in a while. So I know I'm gonna get to some classics in 2021, and these are the ones that I'm kind of want to like push myself more towards the front. I want to be like, if you're gonna read classics, it would be nice if you could get to these. So that's why I'm rewarding them with 2 credits as well, so that's, you know, when I'm making my decisions about which classics to pick up, hopefully that will kind of entice me to give those priority over some others. But so I'm actually going to start with 2 that are scheduled for 2021. I have put them already on like my TBR schedule that I'm kind of making already, because they are part of a read-along that Kate Field is doing on her channel for her Patreons. And so these are books that were actually on my 12 books for 2020 list, but I didn't get around to them in 2020, and so I'm hoping to push them for 2021, the beginning of the year. And that will be Don Quixote de la Mancha Part 1 by Diego de Cervantes and Part 2. So you can already tell these are chunkers. You know, I think Part 1 is like 670, Part 2 770, so together they are 1,500 pages. I also, in case you noticed, have the Spanish edition, so meaning that I'm going to be putting myself through a 1,500 page classic, 15th century I think classic, in Spanish, which is not my mother tongue. It is like my, apart from my mother tongue, apart from English, Spanish is the language that I do have the best knowledge of, and I do use it daily in a work atmosphere. But you know, in a work atmosphere I don't need as much vocabulary as I do otherwise. However, I did also live in Spain for like half a year. I studied Spanish. I used to have a good level of Spanish, and so I'm hoping that a lot is going to come back to me, though it's probably going to have some vocabulary in there that I'm going to need to look up that's going to be related to certain things that have to do with 15th century life that no longer really are that important. But so Don Quixote de la Mancha is a story about this guy who reads too many novels, basically. He reads too much like pulp fiction novels, let's refer to them like that, and as a result he can no longer really see the distinction between reality and fantasy. He imagines himself to be the same like all these heroes in the stories that he's reading, to be a sort of classical hero, and he sets out on a quest to prove his worth to his love interest Dulcinea. So Dulcinea is basically just a barmaid that he's fallen in love with, and he will take his servant Sancho Panza on a epic quest. But basically reality doesn't match with what Don Quixote thinks is happening. So for example, one of the most famous scenes within this one is a fight in which Don Quixote is fighting giants, but in reality is actually trying to fight windmills. And so I'm intrigued about this one. However, I don't really see how we can form a story of 1,500 pages with that and keep it entertaining, but I do see this pop up a lot of times in positive reviews. I do see that a lot of people do really enjoy this one, so I'm intrigued about that. I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful for my pace through this one as well, because I basically have put this one in January, that one in February, so it's gonna be a big part of my reading in January and February, so I hope that I'm gonna be able to get through it as quickly as I thought that I was gonna get through, because that could immediately kind of upset my first 2 TBRs for the year. And by the way, even though this is one book together, they are counting separately. So this is 2 credits, that's 2 credits. It's too big for me not to allow myself that little like deviation. Next up is a book that basically is one that I kept on my shelves even when I was doing the on-haul process, even though there were other books that I got rid of that were related to the same subject matter as this one. So this is For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. So this is a World War story. Don't really know if World War I or World War II. I'm not necessarily somebody who's drawn to World War literature. However, I have read a few in that genre that I absolutely liked a whole lot. So I'm not entirely sure why there wasn't even a hesitation for me to keep this on there. However, I do want to push myself to put this one somewhere on a TBR this year, just so that I can make up my mind about it as well, because I did read The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, which I liked, but it was super short, and so I couldn't really make up my mind about Ernest Hemingway based on that, and so I do want to try more of his writings, but yeah, we'll have to see. I think it's one of those books that could easily linger on my shelf forever, because as I said, I'm not drawn to this subject matter automatically, meaning that it's not something that I'm going to be in the mood for reading. It's mainly something that I might get in the mood through reading it, so that's why I'm putting it on here. Next up we have Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier. So Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier I consider to be one of my favorite reads of all time. I definitely want to reread as well. Then I read My Cousin Rachel 2 years ago or something by her, absolutely loved it as well, so I do want to dive into more Daphne du Maurier. So Frenchman's Creek, it basically sounds like it's just like a historical romance plot, because it's the story about this sort of woman who leaves these sort of like high English society, like ballroom scenes and things like that, in order to set out and sail away on a pirate ship. And I'm assuming that there's gonna be a love relationship with pirates in it. It just made me immediately think like this could be the setup for a sort of like historical romance story. But I don't think Daphne du Maurier writes historical romance, you know. I don't think that she usually has a dark atmosphere to her work, so it'll be interesting to see what she does with that type of premise. Next up, one that I have twice on my shelves, and that means that I do want to read it to decide whether I'm keeping one of these editions, both of these editions, whether I'm getting rid of them. And that is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This is a book that apparently in the US and maybe even in Canada is very popular to be like required reading, but it's not the case in Belgium. And I actually have been left unspoiled for this book throughout my entire life, so I do want to try it out and see what the fuss is about. And you know, that way I can also expand some of my pop culture references, I'm sure, because if everybody is reading that in the US, I'm assuming that there's probably also a lot of allusions to it in popular works, in like TV shows, movies and stuff like that. So yeah, do want to dive into that one. And I think it's safe to say that the final one on this one is also going to get scheduled, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brönte, which I'll probably put on my October TBR, because October is Victober, and in Victober the idea is that you read Victorian literature, so this one qualifies for that. And so this year I had put it on my TBR for Victober, but I also put The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by her sister Anne Bronte on there that month, and so I read that one, not this one. Wuthering Heights is a book that I've actually attempted multiple times already, but I've never gotten past the first chapter. And so the first chapter is actually like the frame story surrounding the real story that we're zooming in on within this book, or at least within every single movie adaptation that I've ever seen of this one. So this is a sort of like tragic romance story, but it's more like a tragic story. It's more about this sort of toxic relationship in which two people end up tearing one another down. Like, I do think you probably need to go into it not rooting for the love story or not rooting for a happy ending indeed, because as far as I'm aware from the movie versions, there's not much happiness in these people's life. But so yeah, I'll be very interested to read this one, and that will mean that I've read like the major works in the Brönte sisters collection. But so we'll have to see about Wuthering Heights, because as far as I can remember, I wasn't really too intrigued with that first chapter. So we'll have to see, you know, with a frame story. I like stories within stories, so in principle it works, but sometimes the framing story around the story within the story doesn't really work as well for me, so maybe that is what's holding me back from this book. So yeah, these are all the classics that I'm going to be kind of pushing myself towards within 2021. It's definitely possible that I'll read another one than these, but if I do get around to these, they will be worth 2 credits rather than the one that every single other read is worth. So hopefully that will help me push these a little bit more to the front. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you've read any of these, let me know and we can talk about them in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys for a future one. Bye!